Good morning, good Tavach. Good morning, Chasima Tova. Today is Sunday. What is it? Vav Tishrei. Um, Today we're learning Perek Beis of Kilayim, and today's share is sponsored Lilay Nishmas Aaron Nachum ben Simcha Cohen, Yeshua Mordechai ben Shepsel Bracha Sar Bashmuel Leib ben Yaman Moshe ben Yosef. And the show is having a Leah. Excuse me. And for Shlena for Ada Sar Bas Leah. So Shar Chali Yisrael. Okay, we're jumping right in. It's a long parak today. We're going to do this as responsibly as we can. um, okay, so we learned in the first parak about the problem with planting different kinds of seeds together. That's kilayim. It's essentially what kilayim is. Um, but what happens is sometimes when you plant large amounts of seeds, you're planting one type of seed in one row and one another type of seeds in another row. Sometimes things jump over, and it wasn't done intentionally. Um, and sometimes there's other seeds mixed in to that bag of seed. It does happen. Um, so according to the Torah, it's permitted to plant these together as long as there was no intention to grow two kinds. But the Chachamim limited the amount of foreign seed that could be present, and we're going to learn that in the Mishnah Aleph. Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph. Kol sash yesh barova mimin acher yemai. Any sub seed in which there is a quarter kav of a different kind of seed, and the farmer must reduce the other kind to less than a quarter kav before he may plant the seed. I'm not really sure how this is going to work because it's all mixed in together. We're supposed to pick out the the other seeds. I'm not a farmer, so I don't know what this is. I mean, CS, but a saw. The measurement of a saw is 6 calves. And 6 calves is 24 quarter calves. Okay, so you talk, which is a quarter calf is the equivalent to the volume of 6 eggs. The 6 eggs is a quarter calf. So what does that mean? So 6 times 24, 6 times 24, 48, 96, 48, 70, whatever. It's a lot. Um, Hold on. 6 times 24 is 144 eggs to to 6 cows. It's 144 eggs to a sow. It's like 12 dozen eggs to a sow. Interesting. Um, so what he's saying is that if there's 1/24th of that's foreign seed, that Chamim said they have to resolve it. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yavor. Rabbi Yossi says once he starts to reduce the other kind, he must reduce it. He must remove it entirely. Um, he can't just take part of it; take it all. It makes no difference whether the quarter kav of foreign seed is made up of one kind of seed or two or more kinds. If it's different from the seed that's being planted, the main type, then Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon Omer, um, Lo Amru Ela Miminach. The rule only applied when it was talking about one species. And then according to Shimon, if it's two or more, it's not a big deal. Chachamim say, Kol Shu Kilayim B'Sam Mitzdaref L'Rova. Chachamim said that any minority species, let's say your main planting in that area is, I don't know, let's say cucumbers, and there's a little bit of string beans or carrots that are mixed into those seeds. So Chachamim say, Kol Shu Kilayim B'Sam Mitzdaref L'Rova. Any minority species that's Kilayim with the majority of the combines with other such foreign seeds to make up that quarter cup. So that quarter cup, according to the Chacham, can be made of any type that's not a majority seed, and it's a problem according to the Chachamim. Mishnah Beis, Bemed Devar Murim. What are we talking about over here? When is this Isser apply? This isn't there Banim. Tavua Betua, it regards to grain that becomes mixed with grain. The kidneys, or one type of beans with another type of beans. Kidneys is the singular of kitnios. Kitnios, we know, are beans. Um, Beans, peas, rice, sesame. Those are all kidneys. Those are things that Ashkenazim do not eat on Pesach. So when those things are mixed with other types, that's a problem. Tu'ua bekidneys, or if grain became mixed with kidneys, well, kidneys betua, or kidneys that became mixed in grain. It's whether the grain was the majority and the kidneys was the minority, or the kidneys was the minority was the majority, and the grain was the minority. In all four situations, it applies. They gotta take it out. The Amazon, however, in truth, they said, if inedible seeds of garden plants become mixed with grain or kitnius seeds, they start from and the garden seeds, which are not edible, they combine to prohibit the planting of the mixed seeds, even with less than a quarter cup. As long as there is enough garden seed in the mixture to plant a 1/24th of what is usually planted of that kind of seed in the base saw. The base saw is about 50 amas by 50 amas, which is pretty large. It's a pretty large area. Rabbi Shimon says that just as they made it, they were machmir about the rule about garden seeds, so too they said this rule in order to be lenient. What was the rule? For example, flaxseed, pishtan, that became mixed in grain, combines to forbid the mixture only when it comes to 1/24th of what is usually planted of flaxseed in a base saw. This comes to much more than a quarter cup. That was a kula in order to balance out the chumrah from the previous halacha. Haisa Mishnah Gimel. Haisa Sadeyu Zerua Chita V'Nimlach L'Zaris Seorim Yam Tila Ashit Tasliya. So now, what happens if he plants his field with one species and then changes his mind and wants to plant it with another species? So if his field is planted with wheat and Nimlach L'Zara, and he changed his mind and decided to plant it with barley, Yam Tila Ashit Tasliya. You must wait for the seeds in it to grow roots. The yofich, and then turn over the soil by plowing it, thereby destroying the infant wheat plants. And afterward, he can plant the field with barley. Once the seeds have produced roots, they will not grow new roots if the old ones die. Right? So he has to so once the seeds grow root, then he can pull out the roots and he destroy the plants. But if the wheat already sprouted, that is, it broke through above the ground before he decided to plant the field with barley, lo yomer ezov achakach ofich. He cannot say, I will plant the barley and afterward turn over the soil, even though that will save a lot of work. Rather, he must turn over the soil first to destroy the wheat plants and only afterward plant the barley. How much must he plow? Like the furrows of the rain, meaning that the furrows that are commonly plowed after the first rains have fallen, and make sure you have enough space for the rain to gather. even though this leaves some earth between the furrows unplowed, it's enough to show that he's not interested in growing two species. He's therefore permitted to plant the barley. Abishal says, he must plow enough so that there will not remain a base rova, mean a quarter of unturned soil in a base saw. Abishal is stricter than the first time. Okay, moving right along. Mishnah Daled. What happens if someone wishes to replace his grapevines with the field of grain or vice versa? That's the next Mishnah. So Zeruah v'nimlach lenata, if a field is planted with grain and the farmer changed his mind and decided to plant it with grapevines. First he started grain and then he wants to move it over to a grapevine. Lo yomer etav achkach ofech. He can't say, first I'm going to plant the grapevines and afterwards turn over the soil by plowing it. Rather, he must first turn over the soil to destroy the grain seeds and only afterward plant the grapevines. So the opposite case, the two of a nilmachazara, if a field is planted with grapevines and the farmer changed his mind and decided to plant it with grain, lo yomar ezra v'achakach esharish. He can't say, I will first plant the grain and afterwards uproot the grapevines. Rather, he must first uproot the grapevines and afterwards plant the grain. But there's a kula here. If he wants, he can cut off the grapevines close to the ground until less than a tefach of the vine remains above ground. So and he may then plant the grain and uproot what remains of the grapevine afterwards. Haisa said they use the Rua Kanbus, aloof, Lo Yehe Zareya Uba Al Gabehem. If it's sorry about that, if his field is planted with caraway or aloof, Lo Yehe Zareya Uba Al Gabehem. He may not plant another species over them, even if he plows the field first. That they produce plants only after 3 years. Therefore, thus there may be many seeds in the ground that are not taking root and they cannot be destroyed by plowing. See, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. So you can't just rely on turning over the soil because the seeds have been there for so long and it's not going to work. So what about foreign plants that come out on their own in a field planted with different species? He planted A and B comes out. Tavua she'alu basviche istis, isatis. If there was a field of grain in which after growth of isatis came out, and similarly, if the place of the threshing floors, and if in the place of the threshing floors many different kinds of vegetation come out, similarly, if there was a field of fenugreek in which a variety of grasses came out, so you planted one thing and something else comes out, he's not obligated to weed out the foreign species. It's obviously that the farmer did not want these species here since they are damaging to him. Therefore, no one's going to suspect him of growing kilayim. In Nikesh or Kisach, however, if he weeded or cut down some of the foreign species, we say to him, uproot everything except for one kind, because now we see that, because now he's suspected of, he wants some of the foreign species to grow, and therefore he's guilty of maintaining kilayim, and he has to rip it all out. Okay, the rest of this chapter, as well as the next chapter, teaches about how a field may be planted so as to allow different crops to be planted close to one another. So we'll start with this Mishnah Vav. Harotzalasa Sadeu Meshar Mikol Min. If someone wants to make his field into separate strips, each planted with different species, You have like 10 rows or 10 rows in the field. He wants to do row A, row B, row C, and do 10 different, do each strip into the different species. Beishamai Amr Shlosha Talam Shapasiyach. Beishamai says he must leave a gap the size of 3 groundbreaking furrows between the strips, which is um, so a strip itself is at least 6 tvachim wide. I'm going to go back to this Mishnah test. Beis Hillel says below all hasharoni. Beis Hillel say the strips must be separated by the width of the yoke used in Sharon. The Kruvin divrei elu, and the words of Beis Hillel are close to being like the words of Beis Shammai. The two measures are nearly identical. So that doesn't happen so often with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Mishnah Zayin. Rosh Torah Chitim Nichlas B'Sochos Orim. There was a Rosh Torah in a corner of the field of wheat that extended into a field of barley. So you have like a diamond shape, and it's touching into the barley. If you look over here, you can see the picture here. You see, this is, let's say, that's a wheat, and it's a corner, and it's touching the barley. Mutter, so it's permitted. Because the Rosh Torah looks like the end of his wheat field and not like the wheat planted in a barley field. So now that's referring to 2 fields owned by the same person. But now what about 2 fields owned by 2 different people? The previous case referred to, okay, Shalo Chitim V'Shal Chavero Min Acher. If his field is planted with wheat and his neighbor's field is planted with another kind of crop, and there's an empty space between them, it's permitted him to place to plant it in the empty space next to his wheat field, the same type of crop as the one growing in his neighbor's field, provided that he plants the new crop all the way up to the border of his neighbor's field. By doing so, the second species looks like it is part of the neighbor's field. Therefore, even though he is now growing 2 different species in his own field, it is not considered kilayim. Because remember, it says sadachalo sizra kilayim. It doesn't say sadachachavero. So if you have one and he has the other one, it's 2 different fields, it's 2 different ownerships, it's not going to be a problem. Continuing on, shelo chitim v'shel chitim. So now, if he's planted wheat in his field and his neighbor's field is also planted with wheat, he's permitted to place to plant in the empty space next to his wheat a furrow of flax in order to test the soil to see whether it's suitable for growing flax. But he may not place a furrow of any other kind of species in that empty space, since farmers do not grow just one furrow of flax. People seeing one furrow planted at the end of the field will realize that he just planning to test the soil. Because usually they plant many furrows. You just see one done, it means it's just a test. If Shimon says Echad Zera Pishta Echad Kol whether this one furrow is flaxseed or any other species is forbidden because it looks like kilayim. Rabbi Yossi says, lived up to tell him Pishtan, even in the middle of the field, is permitted to test the soil with a furrow of flax. In his opinion, people seeing a furrow of flax, even in the middle of a field, will realize that it has been planted just to test the soil. Okay. Mishnah Ches. Ein samchin l'sadeh teruah chardal v'chariya. You may not plant a furrow of mustard or saffron next to a field of grain, even though the intention is merely to test it. Since sometimes people grow just a single furrow of these crops, it's not obvious that it was just a test. However, we may plant a furrow of mustard or saffron next to a field of vegetables for the purpose of testing the soil. Since they are harmless to the vegetables, everyone will realize they have no intention to let them grow to maturity. Um, okay, now we go on. Samich labor. Samich labor. One may plant a new species next to a strip of unplowed land that has another species growing on the other side of it, well, near or next to the plowed land that has not been planted, but a gafa or a stone wall, or a derech, or a private road, with a gada gavoa asar tvachim, or a fence that's 10 tvachim high, with a hachritz, with a charitz to omek asar rachav arba, or a ditch that is 10 tvachim deep and 4 tvachim wide, with the ilan shu mesach al haaretz, or a tree that covers the ground with its branches, they hang down to the ground. I mean, the tree's covering the ground. With a sela gavoa sarah rachav arba, or a rock that's 10 tvachim high and 4 tvachim wide. All these items serve to separate between different species, and it's therefore permitted to plant one species on one side of them and another species on the other side, because you had these natural barriers between the two of them. Therefore, it's not considered kilayim. Mishnah test. Here's a machlokus about planting different crops near each other. The person wishes to make his field into many squares, all of a different species, kind of like a checkerboard. You have your different squares. He makes 24 squares to a base of land. Mi karachas the base rova, each square measuring a base rova. With Zoreya Besocha Kolman Shias, and he plants whatever type of species he wants in each square, because this size square they appear to be separate from each other and not mixed. Therefore, it's not considered to be kilayim. He can plant whatever he wants in the squares of that size. Haisa karachas achas of shtayim. If there were one or two unplanted squares in the field of grain, Zoram Chardal, he may plant them with mustard. Shalosh. However, if there were three unplanted squares, he may not plant them with mustard. If he nearest chardal, because it looks like a field of mustard. If Rabbi Meir, this is according to Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say Teisha karachas b'taris, 9 squares are permitted in the base. Eser asuros, 10 are usher, because the squares have to be separated by empty squares. You can't plant one exactly right next to another. So like you have if Lesbian Yaakov says, I feel close to a base core, even if a person's entire field is a base core, 30 base sons, well, yes, it was a chutz bikarachas echas. You may not make it in more than one square with different species. As you look at this picture over here, you see that the gray boxes. This is the base saw. According to the Chachamim, you'd only be allowed to plant in the gray boxes and not in the white ones. So there's an empty box between each thing with each square with produce, according to the Chachamim. Mishnah Yud, Kol Shehu B'Soch Beis Rava, anything that's within a base Rava, Oleb B'Midas Beis Rava counts toward the measure of a base Rava. Achilas Hakevin, the work area around the grapevine, we used to have an area of 6 tefachim, which is 18 by 24 inches. That is eaten by the vine, quote unquote. That is because you need to have a space that's around the grapevine in order to work Um, where am I? Yeah. Okay. Uh, Achilles Geffen, the work area on the grave of a kever and a grave, a cellar and a rock, Olim b'midas base rubber, all count for the measure of a base rubber. Tua b'tua, someone wishes to plant one kind of grain in a field of another kind of grain, base rubber, he needs to separate it from what is already growing by a base rubber. Yarek, if wants to plant two different types of vegetables, shish tvachim, they need 6 tvachim between the two of them. Tua b'yarek, yarek b'tua, but if he plants grain in it for the vegetables, or vegetables in it for the grain, base rova, then he needs a whole base rova between them. And Eliezer says, Yarak Betua, for vegetables in a field of grain, she's a tvachim, 6 tvachim are enough. And finally, Mishti and Aleph, Tua Nota Al Gavitua, if grain of one kind leans over grain of another kind, Yarak Al Gavi Yarak, or vegetables of one kind lean over vegetables of another kind, Tua Al Gavi Yarak, or grain leaves over vegetables, Yarak Al Gavi Tua, or vegetables over grain, Akal Mutter, it is all permitted, Chutz Midalar Sivanis, except in the case of Greek gourd, whose leaves become entangled with those of other plants when they lean over them. And finally, Reb Meir says, Av Kishos Upol Mitzri, the same is true of cucumbers and Egyptian bean plants. These two tend to lean over and become entangled with other plants, and they too are forbidden. This is just however, according to Emir, he sees the words of the Chachamim as being more correct than his own. That is the end of Perek base, and we'll continue tomorrow with Perek Gimel. Have a wonderful day.